Good morning. I'm back. Did you miss me? Probably not. Whatever. Just, don't know. Life caught up with me. Things got busy, and then just haven't really felt this, but trying to get back into the rhythm of things. And there's a new magic set dropping, so as good a time as any to try and get back into the flow. So, gonna be slow-paced stream from me, and we'll just start kicking our way through the Drift spoilers and see how far we get. Let me know if volumes of things are working, if I'm loud enough, too loud, if the music is loud enough, too quiet, whatever. Let's go to this. Let's do this. Let's fix that slightly less wonky. That'll do, that'll do. That's working, that's working. Let's get moving. Redmill, please, come on. Work with me here. I really need to get a better way to fix that camera in place. Finish doing that. Moving. Okay, let's just start slow. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Right. Let's get rid of that. Air response unit. 2 and a 1 for a 3/3 artifact vehicle with flying, vigilance, and crew 1. As far as vehicles go, this one's got pretty decent stats. Crew 1 isn't terrible. If you're playing a vehicles deck, this may well be an upgrade to some of the other vehicles available, but is relatively borderline, doesn't do anything incredibly splashy, just bonks around. And vigilance is nice because it means you do at least have the choice of defending with it if you have extra crewers available, but does mean that it is hungry for an awful lot of spare creatures around to crew it. Alacrian Armory. 3 and a white for an artifact. Creatures you control have +0/+1 in vigilance. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1 target mount or vehicle you control. Until the end of turn, that permanent becomes saddled if it's a mount and becomes an artifact creature if it's a vehicle. If you are playing the vehicles deck, this is a pretty mad powerhouse. Or if you're playing a mount deck with, what's her name? I can't remember what her name is. She's green-white legend mount counter. Miriam. That's the one. Very solid in something like Miriam. +0/+1 and vigilance. There's a few decks out that where that's potentially quite valuable, but really you're looking to be taking. This doesn't do a huge amount unless you're getting a lot of value out of this combat trigger. Effectively, this is a 4-mana Ayat crew, whatever, or map saddle, whatever your biggest thing is. Is that good? Not horrible. Like, it lets you play some of the really heavy crew cost cards with less downside to them. It's an interesting card. Basri, tomorrow's champion. Single white mana for a legendary human knight. He's a 2/1. Him being a knight feels a bit odd, but 1 and a white, white and a tap. Exert, create a 1/1 cat token with lifelink. Just pumping out 1/1s and cycling When you cycle this card, cats you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. This doesn't feel great for Commander. Like, as a Commander himself, he's worse than most. He wants to do cat things, but is worse than most other cat commanders. The cycling effect is terrible as a commander because you struggle to get him in your hand. He's not a cat himself, so is less interesting if you are making a cat deck. He's not like this. If you're playing him in cat, he only really does stuff in a cat kindred deck or something where you really desperately want mediocre token creation and are willing to make one every 2 turns. If you're playing cat kindred, he's worth considering just for his cycling ability to go 3 mana. All my cats are hexproof, indestructible, and I draw a card, but he certainly isn't exciting, in my opinion. This card baffles me. Not because of any of the rules text, but because it's a 1 mana 1/1 that's significantly larger than a grizzly bear. Look at the little human riding it. This thing is absolutely enormous. What is going on here? Anyway, art complaints aside, it's a 1 mana 1/1 vigilance that you can saddle for 3 to give it +1/+2 and flying. So you can tap a 3-power creature to attack with a 2/3 flying vigilance. This card is bad. Like, if you desperately need a small thing to get through because your big ground creatures aren't working, then fine, but just play a Healer's Hawk. Like, a 2/3 flyer that you've had to tap a 3-power creature for is just atrocious. Brightfield Mustang. 3 and a white, 3/3. Whenever this attacks while saddled, untap and put a +1/+1 counter on it. This I quite like. It's not amazing, but giving itself pseudo-vigilance and pumping itself when it attacks while saddled takes out a lot of the downside of having to saddle it. Because when you saddle it, you lose a creature. When you attack with this, you have another tapped creature. But this then untapping itself means you still have a reasonable blocker and it can just keep growing. Certainly not an incredibly exciting card, but it's absolutely not. Sorry. Why are there ads in my lo-fi? That is not what I was hoping for. Let's try a different lo-fi. And see if that remains ad-free. Okay. Brightfield Mustang. Reasonable little attacking dweeb if you can do things that take advantage of its attack triggers or counter triggers. It has the potential to get kind of out of hand. Broadcast Rambler. 4 and a white for a 5/4 artifact vehicle. When it enters, make a 1/1. Colorless Doctor artifact creature token with flying and crew 1. If you like medium-sized vehicles with cheap crew costs, here you go. If you like vehicles that bring things to crew them with them, here you go. None of the stats on this are exceptional, but it's just a chonk. To keep up with the Grand Prix, reporters trained just as hard as the races themselves. This set, I just don't vibe with this set. Motorsports have never really been my thing. Can't really hear the lo-fi. Let's turn up the lo-fi. in which case let's turn down my headphones so I can hear myself think. Bulwark Ox. 1 and a white for a 2/2 Ox mount. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Sacrifice this creature. Creatures you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Saddle 1. If you have a very counter-focused deck, and white is very happy to do that, this becomes just all my creatures have the potential for indestructible on them, which is always satisfying, and it just becomes a semi-reliable source of counter distribution. Having to attack while saddled to distribute a counter isn't ideal. It's much worse than other similar versions of this effect, which just distribute a counter at the beginning of combat, but can certainly be made to work. And will get, if you just put counters on this, it will get big enough, fast enough, and comes down early enough that it remains a reasonable threat. If you've got a very +1/+1 counter focused deck, this is definitely worth considering. Might suggest this for my wife's Perry random counters thing, just for the sacrifice effect, but not sure how much she cares about hexproof and indestructible in there, given how much shielding she has going on. It's an interesting little cow. Canyon Volta. 1 and a white for a 3/1 pilot. Whenever this creature saddles a mount or cruiser vehicle during your main phase, that mount or vehicle gains flying until end of turn. So, we've seen this sort of card before. Just makes your thing cruise with bonuses. This giving flying is a pretty decent bonus. Run this in your vehicle decks or your mount decks. Go smashing in the sky. Some seek thrills in watching the show. Some seek thrills in being the show. I feel like this art is a reference to something, but I am so uncultured in such ways. Cloudspire Captain. 2 and a white for a 2/3 human pilot. Mounts and vehicles you control get +1/+1. This creature saddles mounts and cruise vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. So it can crew as though it had power 4, and acts as a lord for mounts and vehicles. It's fine. It's not particularly exciting. Like, crew for 4 is unusual enough that that's not a huge draw to it when you generally only need 2 or 3. If you could distribute it and put 2 of the crew into this thing, 2 of the crew into that thing, then maybe we'd be talking. But if you want a mediocre pilot with a mediocre lord effect stapled to it, then he's your guy, I guess. But I don't know that I'd be enormously excited. Like, most of the vehicles and mounts, well, that's not true. Most mounts are reasonably statted. Most vehicles are overstatted for their mana cost anyway, so giving them an extra +1/+1 isn't usually a huge boost to them. Might be slight. This is probably more interesting in a dedicated mounts deck, thinking about it. Your mounts are usually smaller, and I think there are more of them with higher saddling costs than there are vehicles with high crew costs. Bit odd considering that he's clearly on some sort of vehicle, but my inclination is this is a better mount card than vehicle card. Collision Course, where the Goblin Barrel Wagon is being blown up by a couple of angry crocodiles. I will try not to gripe about this set, but this is really not my vibe. These gators are driving like idiots, said Redshift. Collision Course, 1 and a white sorcery, not instant. Choose one. Collision Course deals X damage to target creature where X is the number of permanents you control, that of creatures and or vehicles, or destroy target artifact. Okay. Removal spell based on how many creatures you've got. I've seen this sort of effect before. They're usually pretty reasonable, especially if you're going wide, and destroying target artifact is an often helpful option. Modal spells are always happy to be seen in many commander decks because you've only got 99 slots to work with, so flexibility is always nice. 2 mana is pretty reasonable for both these effects. If this was instant, would be very excited for it. At sorcery, it's still a pretty reasonable consideration, especially if you're in a very go-wide deck for this first version. If you can reliably cast this where X is 5 or more, this is a pretty solid card. If you're not hitting that, it's probably not worth it. Daring Mechanic. People claim this is Mario. 2 and a white, Human Artificer, 3/3. 3 and a white, put a +1/+1 counter on target man or vehicle. Just a mana sink. If you're find you often have excess mana that you can't do anything with and you're in a deck that cares about mounts and vehicles, this is probably fine. I prefer this to the generic Lord because you can steadily stack and build things up to make a pretty significant increase over the course of several turns. But 4 mana for a +1/+1 counter on only a limited number of targets is really not very exciting. Just a few more bolts, shark on your right, and we should be good to go. Detention Chariot. 4 white. We have a 6/6 artifact vehicle. When this vehicle enters, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until this vehicle leaves the battlefield. Cruise for 3 and has cycling for 1. A 6 mana Oblivion Ring is terrible. A 6 mana Oblivion Ring that can attack as a 6/6 is slightly more interesting, but still quite restrictive. A 6 mana 6/6 Oblivion Ring that if you don't need it, you can just throw away to draw a card, makes it quite a lot better. Is this good enough outside of a vehicles deck to see play? Probably not. We've had a lot of very pumped Oblivion Ring style effects over the last few years with various levels of upside. I do not think this upside is better than something like Sheltered by Ghosts. But if you're a vehicles deck, this is a tolerable piece of removal, and that's the other option. Is this not just another limo? No? That's fine. Mysterious Limousine, when it enters or attacks. For starters, this is 5 mana and crew 2. 4/4 is worse, but this has recurring value because you can either blink your own stuff with it or repeatedly snipe things, whereas the Detention Chariot hits one thing only. The cycling is a nice upgrade, and if you're in some sort of artifact reanimation deck where you want to put artifacts in your graveyard and get them back out again, that cycling is a pretty big upside and makes this much more playable in that style of deck. Funk's me worse one. Yes. I think the play pattern between Detention Chariot and Mysterious Limousine looks very, very different. I do not really consider them comparable, just because being able to flicker your own things against only exiling your opponents is a huge difference. But then again, I'm a prolific Blink player, so maybe I care about that more than others would. Gallant Strike. 1 and a white, destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater, cycling 2. It is an instant How do I feel about this? We see yet another in Wizards' endless attempt to go, how many white removal spells that care about something being 4 can we produce? We've had toughness greater than 4, toughness less than 4, power greater than 4, power less than 4, instant, sorcery, 3 mana, 4 mana, this, that, the other. 2 mana, instant, and cycling 2 mean this may be one of the best of the whole bunch, except for the ones that are modal and give you things like indestructible or hexproof options staple to them. Cycling gives you a lot of flexibility if you have it in hand and it doesn't look like it's going to be relevant. Very reasonable little removal spell, nothing thrilling, nothing miserable. The ghost shrieked as Terrian's blade sank deep. Perhaps a second death would teach it not to mess with his dog. Glory Heath Lynx. It's a 1 and a white for a 2/3 with lifelink cat mount. It has saddle 2, and whenever this creature attacks while saddled, search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Holy power creep Batman. A 2 mana 2/3 lifelink is already a solid magic card. Nothing amazing in Commander, but I have definitely seen people play Vampire Nighthawk. Not Vampire Nighthawk? What's the one I'm thinking of? 2 mana 2/1 lifelink. Anyway. 2 mana 2/3 lifelink, if you're in a deck that, like one of the unicorns that really cares about lifelink or Trelasara or any of the effects that give, when you gain life, distribute that many +1/+1 counters, this card is kind of bonkers, and the ability to land filter it out of your deck when you need it is very valuable. Early game, if you have the ability to saddle it, you've got a pretty good chance of being able to act somewhere with a 2/3, and late game, it's the sort of card you can just throw away in an attack. If you're desperately digging for that extra land, you're not going to be enormously upset if your 2/3 dies. This, I think, is going to be underappreciated by a lot of players. Don't look down on this too much in Commander. It will do work. Guardian Sunmet. Those are some weird looking forces. 3 white for a creature horse mount. It is a 5/5. It has ward 2. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, search your library for a non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle, and it saddles for 4. Okay. So we've got a 5/5 with ward 2. If you tap a 4/4 and attack with this, you get to put a 3 mana permanent from your library onto the battlefield. That seems bonkers. Right? Like, there are so many powerful 3 mana permanents. Like, I attack with this. I search up Ristic Study and put it on the battlefield. Yes, you need to have this and a 4-power creature. That's a lot of second. But being able to choose to something onto the battlefield every turn seems absurd. And Ward 2 makes it difficult to deal with. 5/5 isn't enormous, but there is often going to be at least one player you can attack with that. This card is, if you see this card, be afraid, run some board wipes. I am going to have to look through my Never Stop Attacking deck to see just how many interesting things I have at mana value 3 or less, and how easy it's going to be to saddle for 4. Writing this card down for reference, because even if I'm not doing degenerate things with it, just getting a 3 card every turn is still insane. Like, think, yes, if you see this, you need to be afraid that your opponent's going to just do some bonkers combo. But it's also just cheating on mana every turn. I thought the cat was screaming at me, never. Guidelight Synergist. 3 and a white for a 0/4 robot artificer with flying. Gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. Declarative. A unit is only as strong as its network. 4 mana 0/4 flyer, not great. 4 mana X4 flyer, where X is your artifact count, has the potential to be very big and smashy if you're in an artifact deck. If you're playing a lot of artifacts, this card is worth considering. If you're not playing a lot of artifacts, don't even bother. Pretty simple card. Finally, something that doesn't need a lot of thinking. Interface Ace. Another 1 and a white artifact of 0/4. Not 1 and a white, the last one was 3 and a white, but another white 0/4 artifact creature. This is a robot pilot. It saddles, mounts, and crews vehicles using its toughness rather than its power, and when it becomes tapped during your turn, untap it only once each turn. To the Guidelight Voyagers, a vehicle is just another hardware upgrade. Okay. This is probably the best pilot we've seen so far in the set. Crewing for or saddling for 4, excellent. Getting to untap so you can do it again or hold it up to block, amazing. This, I think, is pretty much auto-include in any vehicle or mount deck. Leonin Surveyor. 1 and a white for a 2/2 cat scout with start your engines. During your turn, this creature has first strike and it has a max speed effect. Okay, let's explain start your engines. The mechanic about going super fast by doing a little bit of damage to your opponents each turn over several turns, because if you do it all at once, you do not get the maximum effect. Start your engines. If you don't have speed, you now have speed 1. Your speed, once you have that, start your engines stops doing anything on any other cards. You need 1 card to start your engines, and after that, all start your engines rule text is completely irrelevant on any other card. Once you have speed 1, on each turn, the first time, on each of your turns, the first time an opponent loses life, it increases by 1. So, the turn you play a Start Your Engines card, if you can make an opponent lose life, you go to speed 2. If you make another opponent lose life, that turn nothing will happen, but on the next turn cycle, you can increase your speed once again, and once you have speed 4, you have max speed. And Leonin Surveyor, when you have max speed, says 3 mana, exile this card from your graveyard, draw a card. So we have a 2 mana 2/2, first strike on your turn, and introduces speed. This is not a particularly good card on any of what it's doing, unless you are absolutely desperate to get speed going. If you are utterly desperate for speed, then go ahead, but I think there are going to be much better options. I've glanced at the spoilers as they've come out, but I have not seen every card in the set, so I'm making some assumptions. Light Shield Parry. For a single white instant, target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, cycles for 2. Nothing extraordinary here. If you're in the sort of deck that wants combat tricks like Feather, this might be a consideration, but it is quite limited. Yeah, I think it's basically just Feather that's going to, and the similar sort of... There's a lot of feathers. Feather the Redeemer. Redeemed. When you cast a new sorcery, return it to your hand at the next end step. Yeah, so you can just keep doing this until you decide you don't need this anymore, and then you can cycle it away hoping to hit something better. Light Wheel Enhancements. This card, I think, is very strong and quite scary. Light Wheel Enhancements, single white, enchantment aura. Enchant a creature or vehicle. Enchanted permanent gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. And start your engines. So we set our speed to 1, and then if we have max speed, you can cast this card from your graveyard. A 1-mana enchantment that you can cast from your graveyard repeatedly for no additional costs is excellent. We've seen this sort of effect before, where just like a +1/+1 and vigilance isn't anything extraordinary, but is valuable enough in a lot of Voltron style decks. Vigilance is enormous, and +1/+1 for 1 mana is fine. But being able to go, oops, my commander got dead, let's get it back, is insane. Like, what is it? We've had Griff's Boon, where we've got to pay 4 mana to return it. Flying is better than vigilance, yes, but still. And then we've got this side. Should go to advanced, really. Advanced search. Text. Escape. Vigilance. Pipe. Aura. Escape. Thank you. Search. Sentinel's Eyes, that's what I'm thinking of. Where we have exactly the same thing, but instead of just having to get to max speed, we have to exile cards from our graveyard to get to where we want to be. Yeah. Light Wheel Enhancements, if you're playing Voltron or you're playing some sort of very enchantment heavy, want to keep looping and getting enchantment effects, I will highly recommend this. Reminder that increasing your speed doesn't require you to do damage, just make opponents lose life. And it isn't end of turn check or something, it's just whenever it happens. So even if you can just get an opponent to crack effect land during your turn, that will increase your speed. Random ping effects, random life loss effects. Increasing your speed is very straightforward. Lotus Guard Disciple. 2 and a white for a 2/2 flying. When it enters, target creature or vehicle gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn. Very reasonable little blink target. Like Windrake, rest in peace. You are so far surpassed by this, it isn't even funny. This is a common that gives something lifelink and indestructible and leaves you a 2/2 flying body. Mad. If you like having attackers able to attack, here is your friend. Nesting Bot. A single white artifact creature robot. It is a 1/1. It has start your engines. When this dies, you make a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token, and if you have max speed, it gets +1/+0. So it's a 1/1 that can become a 2/1 that will always make you an extra 1/1 when it dies. It's fine. I doubt this is being played for the max speed effect. This is just a let's make some artifact bodies that make more artifact bodies doing artifact body things. Perilous Snare. 2 and a white for an artifact with start your engines. When this artifact enters, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until this artifact leaves the battlefield. And if you have max speed, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or vehicle you control, activate only as a sorcery. Did I say that we had better Oblivion Rings than that 6-mana vehicle? Yeah, here's a better Oblivion Ring. Hit non-land permanents, which is always nice, and has a pretty massive upside if you can ever get to start your engines. +1/+1 counters every turn is a great upside. Getting to max speed, I think, will generally be straightforward, and Oblivion Rings help with that because you can clear out an irritating blocker. Make a note of this for my own lists. Pride of the Road. 3 and a white for a zombie cat warrior. It's a 2/5 with vigilance, and start your engines. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature or vehicle you control gains double strike until end of turn if you have max speed. So it's a 4-mana 2/5 vigilance that can start dishing out double strike later in the game. That's pretty neat. It's holding the Kopeshes the wrong way round. They're meant to slice inwards, but zombie, so cat and warrior are all very reasonable creature types as well, and all ones that find it quite easy to hit your opponents either with life loss triggers or just combat. So getting to double the max speed should be pretty straightforward with this. If you're an aggressive deck, this is quite an interesting card to consider. Double strike is always a powerful effect, and this doesn't have to be attacking to distribute it, you just have to have max speed and get to combat. And a 2/5 vigilance is a pretty decent wall to defend yourself. This card's going to be disgusting in limited, isn't it? Focus, this is Commander review. We can leave draft and sealed to the other people. Ride's End. This is just Mad Max, right? 4 and a white, instant, costs 3 less if it targets a tapped permanent, exile target creature or vehicle. Exile is a pretty nice upgrade on this. 2 mana, exile an attacker that's tapped is great. Is this good enough in Commander? I don't know. It is probably not quite good enough, but it isn't miserable. Their race ended much the same way it began, walking through a sandstorm on a world that ended long ago. I doubt it's going to see much play, but if you're playing something that cares about silly things like cost reductions, this could be quite good. Like, if you're playing up the beanstalk, when you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, even if you cast it for the reduction, this is still 5, you still get the card draw, that sort of shenanigan. Something to consider, not a particularly exciting card outside of limited, but on we go. Roadside Assistance. 2 and a white for an enchantment aura, enchant a creature or vehicle. When it enters, create a 1/1 pilot creature token with this token saddles, mounts, and improves vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. Enchanted permanent gets +1/+1 and has lifelink. So what are we doing? 3 mana for +1/+1 and lifelink and gives you an extra body. It's not great, but passable. I don't know. I don't think this is. Even it giving you, unless you desperately want things to give extra crewing, I don't know, 3 mana feels like a lot for this effect. Lifelink on a big vehicle can be nice, but you still get the problem of just, if they destroy your vehicle, you lose that and this, and all you get left behind is this lousy pilot. I don't know. I am not I'm not vibing this card. No road has to be travelled alone. Sure, but it doesn't have to be travelled with you either. Salvation Engine. 4 and a white for a mythic 610 vehicle. I'm not vibing much. I don't like this set. I still need to read the story for it, but like mechs and races and just what mashing up the multiverse willy-nilly, I just don't get it. It's not me. It's not for me. That's fine. Not every Magic set has to appeal to the tastes of Tim. And sometimes I think I won't like it, and then I get surprisingly hyped for it. Like, going into Duskmorn, I was not very interested. Like, 80s horror, also not my jam, but I ended up really liking Duskmorn and the way it all came together. But so far, Aether Drift is not hitting for me. We'll see how we go. Anyway, Salvation Engine. 4 and a white for an artifact vehicle is a 6/10. Other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever this vehicle attacks, return up to one target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield and cruise for 6. The crew for 6 is effectively crew for 4 because of the other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. A 6/10 double lord that reanimates things is pretty absurd. If you are in any artifact deck that features white, I think you want this. Returning any artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield on attack is great. A 5-mana 6/10 double lord is great. Crew 6 hurts, but even 5 mana for other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2 and it just sits there is, yes, overcosted compared to something like Tempered Steel, but it's still not horrendous, and the potential upside if you ever get to attack and with it crewed more than makes up for it. The Guide-like Voyagers seem to exhibit more humanity than their flesh and blood competitors, according to PNLR. Yeah, well, have you seen what some of the flesh and blood competitors are? Like, we've got all sorts of nonsense running around here. Skyseer's Chariot. 1 and a white for a 3/3 vehicle. It has flying. As this vehicle enters, choose a non-land card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name cost 2 more to activate, and it crews for 2. So, a 2-mana hate piece. If you sit down and your opponent's playing a commander with an activated ability you just don't want to deal with, here's your friend. So we're talking about things like Obey Curse, who just screws up turn sequences. We're looking at things like, do people still play Reese, the Redeemed? Like, adding 2 mana to those makes the deck a whole lot worse. That sort of nonsense. Or just, you look at what's on the board and go, you know what? That card is irritating me. I don't want you doing that more. Like, that's it. Name Visceraseer. Make your sacrifice-based opponent miserable by making them have to pay 2 mana to sacrifice their creatures now. Only hitting 1 card is very restrictive, but it also means that you don't make enemies of the entire table, just 1 opponent. And then, crew 2 to make a 3/3 flyer is not a terrible size. Card is absolutely fine. Very meta dependent. If you've got opponents who keep doing unpleasant things with activated abilities, this might be something you want to consider putting into your decks. Doesn't have to be restricted to a very vehicle-centric one. Just playing it as a 2-mana artifact that says that card doesn't work properly anymore is absolutely reasonable. Spectacular Pile-Up. That is a lot of colours. 3 white sorcery. All creatures and vehicles lose indestructible until end of turn, then destroy all creatures and vehicles. That's a pretty fun rack. Probably best in a very low permanent deck or some sort of planeswalker deck, because blowing up all creatures and vehicles doesn't mean that you're not getting left behind with much either, and cycling 2 so that if you've got this in hand and the board state just does not care about having a board wipe thrown at it, you can just get rid of this. The first 4 crashes were accidental, then the End Riders joined the fun. If you like 5 mana rafts that take Indestructible away before going bang, this is a great card. If you don't like board wipes, this is not for you. Spot Cycle Scouter. 1 and a white for a 3/2 vehicle. When it enters scry 2 and crew for 1. It's just fine. Not an exciting vehicle. If you're desperate for 2-drop vehicles, you'll play it. Scry 2 is mediocre. Crew 1 on a 3/2 is fine, but 2 toughness is very fragile on a commander table. Sundial, Dawn Tyrant. It is a 1 and a white legendary artifact creature construct. It is a 3/3. We have vanilla cards in Magic again! They can do it! It's also a legendary vanilla creature. Why, Wizards? What is going on in this world? What is happening? Sundial, Dawn Tyrant. Legendary artifact creature construct 3/3. We follow it as it walks at the head of the ever-breaking day. Is it leading the dawn, or does it march to some forgotten celestial order? It does not answer our questions, so faith must sustain us. Chakshi, Dawn Chaser Pilgrim. I don't know who particularly cares about having a 2 mana 3/3 vanilla. It's an artifact, it's a legend. If you can find a way to do something bonkers with this, then please do let me know. I would love to find out. Grizzly bears eat your heart out. Construct can do fun things. Not generally. The constructs that do fun things have that rules text built into them. Oh. It makes grizzly bears look pathetic. That's about it. It's a vanilla creature. Let us just take a moment to be excited about the fact that we have cards that don't have paragraphs of rules text. And we're back to paragraphs of rules text. Swiftwing Assailant. 3 and a white for a 3/3 flying. With start your engines, and if you have max speed, it gets +0/+1 and has vigilance. If you particularly want to introduce speed to the game, this isn't the worst way to do it. A 3/3 flyer will get through somewhere most of the time, and becoming vigilant later makes it a little bit more passable into the late game, but the stats are not amazing on either end, and I don't know, I am not convinced that any of the max speed payoffs make including this in your deck worth it. Tune Up. 3 and a white for a sorcery. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If it's a vehicle, it becomes an artifact creature. Well, that's just silly. This becomes an artifact creature permanently. That vehicle now just permanently crewed. Never have to worry about it again. And just reanimating an artifact is always dumb and overpowered. Yeah, I'm going to have to read the story for this, aren't I? Why the heck do we have Chandra, Lute, Pia, and Doretti all in one place? They're on 4 different teams, I thought. For most people, the odds would be insurmountable. Doretti said. But we're not most people, Pia replied. I don't know why she went so English there. That was weird. But we're not most people. Is probably be closer to how she would. Anyway, silly artifact reanimation spell. If you care about filling your graveyard and getting things out of it with artifacts, this is your friend. If you're playing a heavy vehicles deck, this is your friend. If you're not doing one of those things, you don't really care about this until you see your opponent play it. Unswerving Sloth. 3 white for a Sloth amount. It is a 5/5. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, it gains indestructible until end of turn. Untap all creatures you control, and it saddles for 4. I have a complaint about this card. It says unswerving, right? You see it says unswerving, and yet it taps, that is a swerve, then it untaps, that is another swerve. It is the most swerving Sloth. If it had vigilance and untap all other creatures, then yes, this would be the unswerving Sloth. But this, tap, untap, that is swerves all over the place. No, we're done with this card. Okay. Fine. A 5/5 that gains indestructible and untaps all your creatures is quite reasonable. Saddle for 4 is quite expensive, but you get to untap whatever you tap to saddle it, so that you aren't really losing out on anything, and you just get to keep hitting with a 5/5 pseudo vigilant indestructible. Go for it. Quite reasonable. Valor's Flagship. 4 white for a legendary artifact vehicle. It's a 7/7 with flying, first strike, lifelink, and cruise for 3. And has cycling. X, 2, and a white. When you cycle this card, create X 1/1 colorless pilot creature tokens with this token saddled mounts and cruise vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. So, you pay 4 mana, you put this in your graveyard, you make a pilot. Then next turn you cast Tune Up for 4 mana, you return this to the battlefield as a fully vehicled, fully creatured even, flying first strike lifelink. Is a 7 mana flying 7/7 first strike lifelink good? Obviously. Is crew 3 a huge downside? Not particularly. Is cycling to make X 1/1s with upside good? Yes, it is. Powerful in a vehicles deck, reasonable in any big smashy white deck. Reminder that cycling is instant speed and doesn't count as casting a spell, so it's very difficult to interact with. So sometimes you'll just have this in hand and cycle it. X is 4, look, I have 4 surprise blockers. Great card, lots of versatility, lots of ways to take advantage of what it does. Good game ender. Onwards. Voyager Glide Car. A single white for a vehicle that is a 2/3. When it enters, scry 1. Tap 3 other untapped creatures you control. Until end of turn, this vehicle becomes an artifact creature and gains flying. Put a +1/+1 counter on it. Cruise for 1. So, you've got a 1 mana 2/3 that when it enters, scries 1. Sure. Crew it for 1 to just go hitting with it. Okay. Crew 1 to get a 2/3. Not thrilling, but not horrible. Or you can tap 3 other untapped creatures you control to put a +1/+1 counter on it, give it flying, and make it into a creature for the turn. So over the course of the game, this just keeps growing, and if you don't want to give it flying, you can just go back to crewing 1, and all of the counters are still sticking around to make it bigger. Happy days. Exclamatory. Hang on to something. Seems like a pretty solid card in a very go-wide strategy. Not necessarily something you want for a vehicles deck, more something you want for a very tokeny build so that you can just throw a pile of counters on it. Voyager Quick Welder. 2 and a white for a robot artificer. It's a 2/4. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. A pretty decent cost reducer for artifacts. We've seen this sort of card before. They are always interesting and often do a lot of work. The Guide-like Voyagers have been stranded on a Vishkar with no way to get home. They considered every last unit essential, down to the glitchiest grunt. And then we've got some alt art things, which I'm pretty sure I told it to filter out, but nobody asked me to make their function work. And then we have the Commander set cards. On Wings of Gold. 3 and a white enchantment. Creatures you control that are zombies and or tokens get +1/+1 and have flying. And whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 1/1 white zombie creature token. Yes, I will finish white first. I knew I had the commander card still to go, dear commentary wife. I will take a break before I get to blue. Right. Creatures you can control that are zombies and or tokens get +1/+1 and have flying. That is a very powerful anthem by itself in any white token deck or any of the zombie decks that are going around. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 1/1 white zombie creature token. That is a lot more niche. It requires some very specific deck shenanigans or your opponents to be running quite a lot of individual graveyard hate. But still, even if you never get anything off the second part of that, just Anthem and flying for all of your tokens is incredible. The Edge of Naktamun was once protected by Kefnet. The honoured mummies who patrol it now do so in his image. Rest in peace, Big Bird. Priest of the Crossing. Work in your ones deck? Not quite sure what your... I've already put it on the list for my Ratadravic deck, because that cares about that, and I've got a pile of reanimation effects in there, so things keep leaving my graveyard. I don't think this goes in my +1/+1 set. I guess I've got shenanigans to get things out of my graveyard, but really I want things distributing +1/+1 counters that this does not do, and it's not really token heavy enough to get payoff from the first line. Priest of the Crossing. 3 and a white for a 3/3 zombie bird cleric, all interesting creature types, all have a pile of synergies to them. Flying. Not surprising from a bird, even if those wings do not look like they are capable of sustaining flight. At the beginning of each end step, put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of creatures that died under your control this turn. If you can do shenanigans where you manage to keep a board state while sacrificing a lot of creatures, this card is absurd. But even without that, it has the potential to just keep chucking swarms of +1/+1 counters around, even if you just throw away random small creatures in combat. If you see this opposite you, you need to be very careful about how you approach combat with that player until you get rid of this bird. This I do want in my +1/+1 counters deck. Renewed Solidarity. 2 and a white for an enchantment. As this enchantment enters, choose a creature type. Right? Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+0. Not very exciting, but sure. At the beginning of your end step, for each token you control of the chosen type that entered this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. Okay, now we're talking. The first line sets us up. The second line is not very interesting, but that third one, doubling season all of that creature type tokens on a 3-mana enchantment. Oh yes, please, let's go. My Ratadravic deck, I will play this. I will choose zombies. I will have a very silly time. Yes, I will. If you're choose a creature type, it does make this very restrictive. But if you've got a deck that throws out an awful lot of the same type of tokens, this is worth considering. Wizened Mentor. 1 and a white for a 2/2. It's a zombie cleric. Whenever an opponent activates an ability of an opponent that isn't a mana ability, make a 1/1 white zombie creature only once each turn. If this didn't have only once each turn, this would be excellent. As it is, that's very limited, and you need to really want those white zombies an awful lot to consider playing this. If you're in a very dedicated zombie deck, this may be worth running, but getting a potential of 4 zombies a turn cycle and a minimum of 0 is not very exciting. I think this card is quite a trap. It wasn't that his students were better, it was that his students had made him better. And then we're on to reprints. Okay, let's jump through those until we find some blue cards. Find the start of blue cards. There we go. Right. I'm going to disappear for a minute, grab a drink, catch my breath, and then I will be back and we will continue with blue. See you in a moment. Ooh. Okay. On we go. Now come back. Okay, I did save that. Marvelous. Right. Blue cards. Ether Siphon. 1 blue for an artifact with start your engines. 2 and tap, draw a card, and if you have max speed, whenever you draw a card, each opponent mills 2 cards. This feels like it isn't quite sure what it wants to be doing. Drawing a card and milling are both slow, grindy, not really combat mechanics, and start your engines requires you to keep pinging your opponents in some way. I have no idea what sort of deck wants this, but there probably is one. Each opponent mills 2 cards is strong, if you are able to take advantage of it, but it also loads up all their graveyards, which can be dangerous. 2 mana tap, draw a card repeatably is fine, but not thrilling. I guess it's basically just an infinite clue. I guess that's where you really want it. You want it in a deck where you're just completely ignoring all of the start your engines and max speed stuff on this, and you're just going, it's a 3 mana artifact that I can just endlessly draw cards off of. Right, ignore all the start your engines max speed stuff. This is just 1 blue artifact, 2 tap, draw a card. It's not thrilling, but it's not horrible. Bounce off. Single blue, instant, return target creature or vehicle to its owner's hand. Control lost is adventure gained. Set is a keelhauler proverb. Right. Not trusting the keelhaulers with anything. Got it. 1 mana bounce spell. It's a 1 mana bounce spell. It's a 1 mana bounce spell. Fine. Can bounce your things, unlike quite a few of these effects we've seen recently, which is nice, but is it particularly better or worse than any of the other options currently going? I don't know. Lorna, Coral Tyrant. I need to put her on my list. And you're sitting there going, but why? You haven't even told us what the card does. That's because it, much like a Null Rod, it does nothing. This is a 1 and a blue for a 0/8. Vanilla. No rules text to speak of. But Tim, why on earth do you want a 2 mana 0/8 that doesn't do anything? Because I am a man of culture. And I play Phoenix, God of Deception, who says creatures you control have tap target player mills X, where X is this creature's toughness. And a 2 mana 0/8 is an excellent card in Phoenix. For centuries she grew in her benthic home, safe from Murgander's moonfalls, feeding on the raw ley lines that run below the water. When she emerged, the cold depths she kept walled home came with her. She's an angry octopus who's going to eat the race. Yes, destroy the track, crush the invaders. Although, we do need to ask how she is achieving this with 0 power. I am confused. But here we are. But yes, anyway, Lorna, Coral Tyrant. Me like her because she has big toughness. If you have decks that care about big toughness, she is friend. If you don't, well, good luck attacking through her. Diversion Unit. This is one very unhappy little bot. Look at those crying eyeball emojis. 1 and a blue for an artifact creature robot. It's a 2/1 with flying, and blue, sacrifice this, counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays 3. Declarative. Goodbye. Small, if you have a flying man style deck, this is probably worth considering. 2 mana, 2/1 flyers are reasonable. Counter spells stapled onto creatures are always good. Not really much to say about this, it's a very simple card. Play this if you want to have on the board tricks and small flyers to annoy your opponents with until they forget that you have an on-board trick. Flood the Engine. 2 and a blue, enchantment aura, enchant creature or vehicle, tap it loses all abilities and doesn't untap. Yeah, we've seen this sort of effect before. It's just another one of the tap down stays tapped. Losing all abilities is a nice upgrade compared to some of the other versions of this we've seen. There had been a time when the End Riders would have killed for water. This is probably an upgrade if you are running this sort of lockdown tap effect, but is not a huge upgrade. Is that true? No. Loses all abilities is a pretty huge upgrade. But yeah, if you're running other versions of this, upgrade it to this. If you're not running this sort of effect, fair enough. It's mediocre in the grand scheme of things, but sometimes this is preferable to an Oblivion Ring, because getting rid of, keeping something on the battlefield and dysfunctional can be better than putting it into exile, where ETBs will re-trigger, or commanders just get stuck in the command zone and replayed again. Gearseeker Serpent is a reprint. We know what it does. It's a 5 blue blue 5/6 affinity for artifacts that can sometimes be unblockable. Generally not good enough in Commander, although a 2 mana 5/6 is okay if you have enough artifacts, but that unblockable text is just too expensive to really be worth investing turns into. Glitch Ghost Surveyor. 2 and a blue for a 2/2 Spirit Scout with flying, and start your engines, and max speed, pay 3, exile this card from your graveyard, draw a card. So this is a pretty decent start your engines card. A 2/2 flyer will just poke through and steadily up your speed, but the payoff of if this is dead, draw a card from it is not exciting, but this is just a common. If you play this in Limited, you're going to have a good time. If you play this in Commander, you need to be in a very specific sort of deck for this to be worth doing. It is a spirit, I suppose, so there are payoffs there that you might be able to take advantage of. Guide-like Optimizer. 1 and a blue for a 2/1 artifact creature robot. Tap, add blue, spend this mana only to cast an artifact spell or activate an ability. Yet again, we see this becoming very standard now. 2 mana blue mana dork only for blue set mechanic. We've seen it for instants and sorceries, we've seen it for enchantments and runes, and now we see it for artifacts and activated abilities. It is what it is. If you're an artifact deck and you want some ramp, here you go. Analysis. Systems operating at 125% efficiency. Stress within expected tolerances. Exclamatory. Punch it. Howler's Heavy. This card amuses me. Look at that schnoz. 3 and a blue for a Seal Pirate. It is a 3/4 and it has cycling. When you cycle this card, target creature or vehicle an opponent controls gets -3 until end of -3/-0 until end of turn. It takes a thick skin to ride among the keel haulers. Well, ain't much thicker than an elephant seal. Yes, that is what this is. This is an elephant seal. I'm not quite sure why it's a 3/4. Elephants are traditionally 3/3s, and I don't know how many seals we have seen in Magic to really get a sense of scale from them. Let's have a look. Search for seals. This is the only seal in Magic. Sure, great, love it. Hello. Anyway, this card isn't great. The cycling effect isn't particularly good. The body isn't particularly good. But if you are in the market for funny arts, here we go. Hull Drifter. If you know your Magic lore, you already know what this card does. This is a 5 mana for 3 blue blue 3/2 flying artifact vehicle. When it enters, draw 2 cards and it crews for 3. It's an Hull Drifter. What sort of drifter are we? This is probably the worst of the drifter set, but if you're very vehicle focused, maybe you want it. Keen Buccaneer. 2 and a blue for an octopus pirate. It is a 2/3 with vigilance and has exhaust. Exhaust we've not talked about yet. Exhaust is, you may use this ability 1 time, ever, the entire game, until you blink this, reanimate this, or in some way make it become a new game object. But, generally, once, ever, only, no second chances. Once this ability is done once, it is exhausted. That makes sense, right? I do like that they managed to use exhaust, which works within this vehicle set, but also isn't vehicle specific enough that we can't see it used elsewhere in Magic in future sets. Good job, Wizards. Anyway, this 2 and a blue, 2/3 octopus pirate with vigilance and exhaust. Pay 1 and a blue, draw a card, discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. The secret to good pirating is being ready for anything. That and having 8 arms. 3 mana, 2/3 vigilance that becomes 3/4 and lets you loot once. Not particularly exciting, but then if you're super pirate heavy, then this might be an upgrade to some pirates you're running. I don't know quite where we're at with pirates now. Anyway, nice introduction to the exhaust mechanic. A lot of the exhausts give a +1/+1 counter just to help remind you that this card has been exhausted, but having a +1/+1 counter it by itself is not unlike an adapt, where having the +1 counter denies adapt at all. Memory Guardian. 4 and a blue for a 3/4 artifact creature robot artificer with flying and affinity for artifacts. If you're a heavy artifact deck, this card is potentially solid for a 1 mana 3/4 flyer. There's nothing really special or exciting going on. It's just a big body for a low cost if you can pull off affinity. For the Guidelight Voyagers, there is no such thing as junk. Midnight Mangler. 1 and a blue for a 3/3 vehicle. During turns other than yours, this vehicle is an artifact creature, and it has crew 2. This is a really interesting take on... We've seen most sets now will have a 2 mana 3/3 with Defender that you can use some effect to make it lose Defender for a turn. This is effectively that. It's a 2 mana 3/3 creature on your opponent's turns, but on your turn you have to crew 2 to make it do anything. That is actually very clever design. I like that a lot. Is someone asleep at the wheel? Or are the wheels driving themselves? Grand Prix host. Clever card design. I don't really know what you do with it. Mindspring Merfolk. It's a 1 mana 1/1. With exhaust for X blue, tap, draw X cards, put a +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk creature you control. So, obviously wants to be played in Merfolk. This is itself a Merfolk wizard. Also just playable in the sort of deck where you want to be able to draw a huge number of cards in one go. Downsides, it's a 1 mana 1/1. It is about as vulnerable as you can get on a commander table. The invasion roused the reclusive Shalpari from the depths. Since then, they had fully integrated into Avishkari society. I don't know, if you're playing Merfolk, here's a 1/1 with pretty big upside. If you're playing some sort of dirtily blue control thing and you just want a body that sometimes you're blocked with and sometimes you will cash in for a huge pile of cards, here you go. Whew. Too much talking. Breathe. Breathe. Okay. Onwards. Mu Yanling, Wind Rider. 2 blue for a legendary creature human wizard pilot. She's a 2/4. When she enters, create a 3/2 colored vehicle artifact token with crew 1. Vehicles you control have flying. And whenever one or more creatures you control with flying deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So, she comes in, she makes a 3/2 vehicle with crew 1. She gives the vehicles flying, and she draws you cards when your flying creatures hit people. Okay, there's a lot going there. Interesting as a commander for a vehicles deck, solid within a vehicles deck. Potentially good as a blink target, although how useful a pile of 3/2 vehicles with crew 1 are, I don't know. incidental card draw is quite nice. The search for her lost mentor continued. Hey look, we get some actual story about Mu Yanling. She's looking for her mentor. No idea who or what that would be. Interesting card, lots going on. Don't know if it quite deserves the mythic flag, but... Nimble Thopterist. 3 in a blue for a 3/2. When it enters, create a 1/1 artifact Thopter creature with flying. The Ether Rangers repurposed Thopters once used for consulate surveillance so they could scout the track. I feel like we've seen this card before, but oh well. Onwards. Possession Engine. 3 blue for a 5/5 artifact vehicle. When it enters, gain control of target creature an opponent controls for as long as you control this vehicle. That creature can't attack or block for as long as you control this vehicle. So you gain control of something, your opponent doesn't have it, and you can just use it to keep throwing, or use any activated abilities it has. Here's a tip. If your ride needs souls for fuel, make sure to always keep one handy. Yep, it's mediocre mind control. You get to a 5/5 vehicle and whatever your opponent's best utility creature is. Not like, make sure you're taking something that you don't care about attacking or blocking with because it can't, and it's fine. Rangers Refueler. 1 and a blue for an artifact vehicle. It's a 3/3. Whenever you activate an exhaust ability, draw a card. And has exhaust for 4 mana. This vehicle becomes an artifact creature, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Reminder once again, this says becomes an artifact creature, not until end of turn, so it will be permanently a creature once you have exhausted that ability. And it crews for 2 normally. So it's a 2 mana 3/3 that crews 2, draws you cards when you exhaust, and then you can exhaust it to draw a card, put a counter on this, and have a permanent 4/4. That's a pretty reasonable pile of effects all stapled together. Like, you probably want to be in a deck where you're going to get at least a couple of cards off of that first line of rules text, but a 2 mana that becomes a 4/4 artifact creature and draws a card isn't horrendous. What am I doing? Repurposing Bay. 2 and a blue for an artifact. 2 and tap, sacrifice another artifact, search life for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact mana value, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Activate only as a sorcery. Birthing Pod for artifacts. Birthing Pod, notoriously one of the most busted cards in Magic, has been banned in Modern for years, just constantly upgrading your things, upgrading your things, upgrading your things. Well, now we're doing it with artifacts. And artifacts just love to be upgraded. So many good artifacts that you can just have death triggers so you can sacrifice them and then get something new with a better death trigger and just keep going up the chain to the most ridiculous artifacts. If this is on the battlefield or under your opponent's control, they are not going to be nice with it. Get rid of it as soon as possible. By the end of the race, few of the Ether Rangers' vehicles resembled what they started as. Riverchurn Monument. 1 and a blue for an artifact. 1 and tap. Any number of target players each mill 2 cards. Exhaust. 2 blue, any number of target players each mill cards equal to the number of cards in their graveyard, only once each game. I need this also in Phoenix. This Millstone. Power creep has finally found you. Farewell, my friend. I cannot spell, apparently. Still can't spell, there we go. 1 and tap, any number of target players each mill 2 cards. It's not a very powerful effect. Although, if you have crimes going on, this is a very good way to get crimes going. But What I am after is that exhaust ability to just slowly grind my opponents down to just past the halfway mark, be nice and fair, equal. Look, I'm not trying to hate anyone, I'm an equal opportunity miller, everyone's getting some. 6 mana, this, tap, exhaust, bye bye, game over. Yes, indeed. Roadside Blowout. 2 and a blue for sorcery, cost 2 less if it targets opponent with mana value 1. Return target creature or vehicle to an opponent controls to its own hand, draw a card. 1 mana to bounce a 1-drop, or 3 mana to bounce anything else and draw a card. I am not sure how I feel about this. This is probably not good. Draw a card is a nice staple thing to have stapled onto it, but only returning creatures or vehicles for 3 mana is very limited. Really, I want to be getting rid of any permanent at that cost. Sabotage Strategist. 2 blue for a Vidalcan Ranger. It's a 2/2 with flying and vigilance. Whenever 1 or more creatures attack you, those creatures get -1/-0 until end of turn. And you can exhaust 7 mana, 5 blue, put 3+1/+1 counters on this creature. So it's a 4 mana, 2/2 flying vigilance that makes it harder for your opponents to attack, and then late game it becomes a 5/5 flying vigilance. That's not bad. Very controlling, very grindy. Flying vigilance is always irritating to deal with. Decent little card. Scrounging Stingray. Oh my word. Look at this guy. Oh, this is hilarious. The art makes it look like he's wearing a poncho. What's with it? This is just weird. Tattoos on his arms, but that don't then spread onto the wings, and what this Scrounging Stingray. 1 and a blue for a 1/2 fish pirate with flying. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, put that many +1/+1 counters on this creature and cycling 2. If you're playing some sort of looting deck or windfalls or cycling, just a dude that gets enormous over the course of a game. 2 mana 1/2 flying that gets big. Have fun. If your opponent plays him, you should probably be concerned because I doubt they're going to do anything nice. Skystreak Engineer. 1 and a blue for a human pilot. It's a 1/3 with flying and exhaust. 4 and a blue, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this. So it's a 2 mana 1/3 flyer. It's fine, not great. And then for another 5 mana, it's a 3/5 flyer. Still not great. Probably avoid this, unless you're really desperate to try and make exhaust functional. Slick Imitator. 1 and a blue for a 1/3 ooze. Start your engines, and if you have max speed, you can pay 1 and sacrifice this creature to copy target spell you control. So it's a 2 mana 1/3 that just durdles for until you have max speed. But then if you manage to get to max speed, you can pay 1 and sack this to copy any spell you control. That has the potential to be very strong, but requires some significant setup to make it work. I love how disturbed everyone in the surrounding of this art is about this guy. Spectral Interference. 1 and a blue instant. Counter target artifact or creature spell unless its controller pays 4. That's pretty reasonable as far as restricted counter spells go. So many fears. Let's make them all come true. If you're in the market for a mana taxing counter spell, here we go. And here's Spell Pierce. We know what Spell Pierce does. Single blue, instant, counter target, non-creature spell unless the controller pays 2. It's been around forever. It continues to be playable in the sort of mana denial control decks. The Druid's aim was dead on, but their choice of targets was dead wrong. Spike Shell Harrier. We got them Mario Karts. We got them blue shells. 4 and a blue for an artifact creature robot turtle. It's a 4/4. When this creature enters, return target creature or vehicle an opponent controls to its owner's hand. If that opponent's speed is greater than each other player's speed, reduce that opponent's speed by 1. This effect can't reduce their speed below 1. Target acquired. Resolution, imminent impact. So, 5 mana, bounce, and then slow the fast. If that is the fastest player, slow them down a bit. Just look at the art. Look at that blatant copyright infringement. Stall out. 1 and a blue, sorcery. Tap target creature or vehicle, put 3 stun counters on it, cycling 2. That's... If it wasn't sorcery, this would be very good. With sorcery, it's still pretty reasonable, and like, locking something down for 3 turns is a very long time in a game of Commander. Like, if based on some of the games I played yesterday, 3 turns is like an hour. And cycling 2 is, if there's nothing worth getting rid of, you can just ship this. Cycling makes every card better. Basically, we're getting this idea. Stall out, lock something down for 3 turns. Yep, they're not a great removal spell, but if you're in mono blue, well, you don't really get great removal spells. That's not entirely true. Like, for 1 and a blue, you've got that exile, they manifest thing. So, again, it comes down to pros and cons, what you actually want your opponents to get out of your attempts to do removal. Stock up. 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. 2 in your hand, rest on the bottom of your library in any order. We are now accepting over 11 different interplanar currencies, including Polished Moonfall. If you want to dig through your deck, 3 mana, look at 5, pick 2 of them isn't horrible. Sorcery is meh, but this is a pretty massive upgrade over Divination, so take it and run with it. I really don't follow. No, this guy just wants infinite snacks to watch the race with. You know what? Sure, go for it. Opta Fabricator. 2 and a blue for a 4/4 vehicle with flying. Through 2. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 colorless Opta artifact creature token with flying. So, 3 mana 4/4 flyer. If you can keep drawing cards on your turn, you get to keep dropping out extra Thopters, which will help defend you and or crew your Fabricator. Every camera had a backup, and every backup had a backup, and every backup's backup had a backup too. That's a lot of Thopters. I spy with my little eye. Not really sure where this wants a home. Like, you need to be able to draw a second card very reliably. Importantly, this is each turn, not each of your turns. So if you can draw 2 cards in each opponent's turn, you can get an awful lot of Thopters out of this. Powerful card with very high upside, but needs a very specific sort of home to make it work. Trade the Helm. 4 blue sorcery. Exchange control of target artifact or creature you control and target artifact or creature an opponent controls. Cycling 2. This is great. That random treasure token you've got, that random best creature they've got. This, I think, is one of the best switcheroos we've seen in a long time. Yeah, switcheroo with just creatures. This lets you really screw things up. Important to note, this won't resolve if your opponent gets rid of whatever you're planning to give them, so it does kind of fold to an instant speed removal spell, but when it works out, it is very funny. This looks like a winning vehicle, but you lot ain't a winning team. Transit Mage. They're 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human wizard. When this creature enters, you may search your library for an artifact card with mana 4 or 5, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle. Finally, everything is complete. We now have a 3 mana human wizard that is a 2/2 that can find any mana value of artifacts. What we are still waiting for is the 4 or 5 mana guitar that we are searching for here, because clearly there is a 4 or 5 mana value artifact guitar somewhere in our future. Alternatively, Doctor Who is now universe canon, and that's the 2 mana artifact, and I don't know why he got it when he cares about mana value 4 or 5. Oh well. Also, what is wrong with that fretboard? Oh my word. The pain, my eyes, the suffering I experience when I look at that. Remember, you can take the wheel if you want, but I choose the music. I don't know. It's neat. The effect is powerful. The flavour of the card baffles me. Trip Up. 3 and a blue, instant. Target non-land permanent owner puts it on their choice top or bottom of their library and cycling for 2. We've seen this sort of effect before, we will see it again. Cycling makes it a little bit better if you draw it at a bad time, but it's always been a pretty mediocre effect. That net was made to hold sky whales. Good luck getting to the next checkpoint. Unstoppable Plan. 2 and a blue, enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, untap all non-land permanents you control. Why the flip is Jace here? Jace knew that if he just had time to explain his plan, he would find support. Unfortunately, time was in short supply. I don't understand why Jace keeps seeming to run out of time to explain things. He has mind powers. He can just take the whole plan and put it in their head and let them decide. He doesn't have to take time to explain it. Jace, why are you even here? What is going on? Why have you mind-controlled someone from 5 different teams? This is a story spotlight. Clearly, I need to read this story at some point just to understand what is going on in this. But, at the beginning of the end step, untapping all non-land permanents you control is really busted. I expect this card is going to be quite expensive. There are so many dumb things you can do with that ability. I especially want it in the aforementioned Phoenix deck, but any vehicles are going to love this because you can just tap out and then still have all your defenses up. Anything with a lot like Bant Elf decks are going to love this. You can tap all your elves and get them all back and do it all again. There's going to be combo decks that can do shenanigans with getting to untap everything all over again. Vnuxt, Verbose Host. 1 and a blue for a 0/4 legendary creature homunculus. He has start your engines. You have no maximum hand size. And max speed, if you draw a card, draw 2 cards instead. Racers, start your engines! Quite how a 0/4 is meant to help you get to max speed, I don't know. But if you can get there with him on the battlefield, you sure are going to draw a lot of cards. He is a strange little dude. Waxen's Shape Thief. 3 and a blue for a 0/0 shapeshifter with flash. You may have it enter as a copy of an artifact or creature you control, and cycling 2. Flashing clones that copy artifacts. Man, this thing is crazy strong. Just sits in your hand, hold up a counter spell, your opponent plays something massive, you go, you know what, you can have that, flash this in, get your own version. Wild. Phyrexian Metamorph may still be better, being 3 mana and 2 Phyrexian, but this is certainly a strong contender. And we're done with that. Let's go down, past all of these painful yellows and get to the commander stuff. Prophet of the Scarab. 4 blue for a 3/4 zombie wizard with vigilance. When this creature enters, draw cards equal to the number of zombies you control or the number of zombie cards in your graveyard, whichever is greater. Oh, 5 mana 3/4 vigilance is not very exciting. Draw a huge number of cards is quite exciting. And the fact that it can do it from battlefield or graveyard means this is a really excellent thing to play after a board wipe, where most of this sort of effect is absolutely dreadful if your board has just been cleared. Heed the Scarab's call or be crushed upon their return. Yeah, very clearly only really want it in a zombies deck, but this is a incredibly powerful one-shot of cards in a zombies deck. Ret Tomb Mystic. 1 and a blue for a 2/1 zombie bird wizard. It has flying, and each creature card in your hand has cycling for 1 and a blue. So, 2 mana 2/1 flyer, fine. To give every creature card in your hand the ability to discard itself, fascinating. Can do some shenanigans with that. What exactly are shenanigans? It's up to you to decide, but just filling your graveyard with stuff is always powerful. Kefnet may be gone, but the thirst for wisdom never dies. And that's on to reprints. Reprints. Well, that's got to be right. We will leave black there, and we will be back hopefully on Wednesday to continue all this madness and see where we try and get through black and red on Wednesday, and then green artifact multicolored land on Friday. That's the hope, at least. Trying to get back into this. Breathing. See you all whenever I get there. Might be starting slightly late on Wednesday. We've got some people coming around to do some stuff in the house. Maybe starting late on Friday, because I'm also having someone coming over on then. I don't know. Hopefully I will stream on both Wednesday and Friday, but the exact times I cannot tell you right now. Hopefully it will be at my normally scheduled time, but who knows. Right. That's me done. What's this? 1:45.